In 2023, I accidentally read everything Alice Oseman has written, and I definitely wasn't expecting to do that. It just kind of started happening in the latter half of the year. Probably not even the latter half so much as the last 3 to 4 months of the year. This happened because I had read Heartstopper Volume 1 a couple years ago, back when Season 1 came out of the show, which, side note, I have not finished watching the show yet, so if you're a fan, feel free to let me know about it, favorite things in the show and everything down below. Try not to spoil. Let's be kind. I don't mind spoilers, but other people reading the comments might. But I read Volume 1 originally back right before Season 1 came out, and I thought it was cute. That was fine. I was like, yeah, okay, Heartstopper. It's kind of adorable. But then didn't feel like the urge to continue on with the series. But this year, Volume 5 came out, and I wanted to be caught up in time for Volume 5 because I was just in the mood for that sort of story, and I was like, it's time, let's just read it. I had bought Loveless back when Loveless released, and I was like, I have to read Loveless before I let myself buy anything else Alice has written. So I put in a request to Libby, shout out Libby, and waited for the audiobook to come in, and when it did, I listened to it, and I just kind of decided, okay, let's put in requests for Alice's other books, and I did. So I physically read all the Heartstopper volumes, as well as Nick and Charlie in this winter, but all the other ones I listened to audiobook, and audiobook was fantastic. Every single voice actor that was cast for these roles was like pitch perfect, so kudos to whoever is doing the casting there. And I thought it'd be fun, because I've read all of them at this point, to rank them all while they're all still fairly fresh in my mind. So that's what we're gonna do today. I liked all of the books. I really liked all of them. I don't think they're all favorites, but I enjoyed them all, and I think objectively as well as subjectively they're good books and important books. I do kind of wish I had read them when I was younger. Obviously they didn't exist when I was the intended demographic, but I do think they would have all probably hit a lot harder if I was younger, just because I did feel like sometimes the age difference as well as cultural differences, because they're all based in the UK, I think all of the books take place in Kent, and although Kent or London, and there was a little bit of like a distance for me as a reader from the stories and from the characters. I don't think that's bad. I just think that's one of the reasons it didn't hit as hard for me, was that distance. Because these are very much books that are telling the reader, I see you. You know, they're meant to be connected with on a very personal level. And I'll talk a little bit more about like overarching things I've noticed in the books at the end of the ranking. But let's talk about the different ranking levels. So up top, we have Nick and Charlie, and I put them on top, or put this as the top thing, because in the book Nick and Charlie, everyone is like, oh, but you're Nick and Charlie, and it's just this like statement and this fact and this thing that is big and wonderful, and their relationship is really wholesome and just like the pinnacle type of relationship you want to have, whether it's romantic or platonic or with a book. You want this sort of idealized relationship. It's not without its flaws, but it's stronger because of the flaws, or because it can overcome the flaws, because of the hardship. So I put Nick and Charlie as the top tier. This is like the tier for like, I loved this book beyond most measure. Then we have number 2, which is I am platonically in love with you. This is a line from Radio Silence. Francis says this to Aled, and I loved this line. I thought it was really beautiful, and it's very simple, but it is just this really wonderful way of expressing affection for platonic relationships. And I don't think that it's less valuable than like a romantic relationship. So I'm not saying like platonic love is not as valuable as the romantic love between Nick and Charlie. I'm just saying, in this ranking, I'm platonically in love with you is a book I am platonically in love with. I love it for so many reasons, but for me, it doesn't go quite far enough. I didn't connect with it all the way. I'm not saying it's like less value. I just really wanted to use quotes from the books, and I thought this was a cute quote that also still expressed this. It was like a 4.5 star read. Okay, please be okay. I'm sorry. Then we have, I hope somebody's listening, another line from Radio Silence, and this is the tier ranking that's sort of for, or I view it as for, the books that I hope people read this. Even if it didn't connect with me all the way, I think it is a really important book to read. I think that it still has a lot of value, and it was good. It could have been better, but it is a very valuable book, regardless of how much I loved it. And then we have at the very bottom, "You're being gay. Good job, carry on." This is a line from Heartstopper. I think volume 3. I want to say Tao said it. I could be wrong. It could have been anyone. Let us be so real. But I thought this was like almost like fan servicey. Like, it's cute, it's fun, it's good. It doesn't have a lot of, or as much value outside of this Osemanverse reading and for fans as the books and I Hope Somebody Is Listening might, but it's still a good book. Because like I said, I enjoyed all of these books. I also thought it would be fun to go through these in the order I read them. So that is what we're going to do. And I'm bundling all of Heartstopper together. So I did put, I put the photos for each of the Heartstopper books just so it would all be on the chart, but they're all going on the same ranking. What is Heartstopper about? Woo! My mouse just like, there we go. Heartstopper. So you've probably heard about it. Boy meets boy. Boys becomes friends. Boys fall in love. That's the pitch. It is about Nick and Charlie. Charlie is the only outed gay kid at his school. And the year previous that led to a lot of bullying, and he has a lot of mental health that he is dealing with across the 5 volumes. Partly tied to that, partly tied to other things. He is more on the academic end. He's got friends. He's got really good close friends. But if you were like a stranger meeting Charlie, your first thought would probably be like, oh my gosh, that's the gay kid. Nick is a rugby player who Charlie is sat next to in, I guess, basically the homeroom. I don't 100% understand how British schools work. I understand a lot better now because of these books, but I don't 1000% understand it. And him and Nick become friends, and Charlie develops feelings for Nick, and Nick realizes he is developing feelings for Charlie, and he's never really had reason to question his sexuality before. It's a really wholesome series. It is really freaking cute. I do recommend either watching episode 1 of the Netflix show, which is like almost 1-to-1 out of the graphic novels, or reading volume 1 of the graphic novels, at least giving it a try. It is super wholesome. It is super sweet. It deals with deep things, but on the scale of Osman books, it's definitely on the lighter end. Some of her books get super frickin' dark, and this is comparatively on the lighter end. I really do like Heartstopper. I'm gonna put it on I'm Platonically in Love with You. We'll put all the volumes there. I do kind of waver a little bit between that ranking and I Hope Somebody Is Listening, but I do think ultimately I get a lot of joy out of Heartstopper. I love Nick and Charlie. I like a lot of the conversations that are happening, especially later in the books. And Charlie's home life is similar to my home life at that age. His parents are very similar to my parents, especially when I was in high school. And so I can connect a lot there with Charlie. I think of all the family dynamics, there are a lot of really positive family dynamics in the Osemanverse, which I appreciate, but that's another thing that kind of keeps me from connecting all the way. Not that I had like a negative family relationship, but like some of these families are just like perfect, right? Not all of them. But Charlie's feels the most realistic to me, and the Spring family feels the most realistic to me, and I feel like I can connect with it the most. I do think that sometimes the story just doesn't go far enough. When it comes to our 2 protagonists, it does, and that is ultimately what the story is about. but I do think that because of the format that it is being told, certain plot threads just aren't able to be explored in depth enough for me to fully enjoy. That might be a little selfish sounding, but I do think that there are weaknesses with the graphic novel format. I love the format. I wouldn't want them to change and be novelizations, but I do think that it is a weakness for the story. And there are moments, additionally, because graphic novels are a lot faster reads than novels, that I almost wish could be dwelled on more. A lot of the things in volume 4, while it does focus on these heavy topics, I almost wish we could have focused more on it. Ultimately, though, I am platonically in love with these books. I love these books. I can wait for volume 6 because I don't 100% want it to be over, but I'm always excited when they come out, or I will be now. I was really excited when volume 5 came out. And as much as it's not like a favorite series, I don't feel like I need to collect every single edition of these books. I liked them. I want to own them. I'll probably carry them with me throughout life. They're good. They're wholesome. They have a lot of value as like messages. Not that all books need to be like valuable, but I do think that these all kind of do have an inherent value because of the different messages in the books and the different things they cover, even outside of sexuality and discovering who you are, especially as a young person. Different story. Okay, so then I read Loveless. Oh, Loveless. Okay. Where are you gonna go? So Loveless is Alice Oseman's most recently published novel, and you can tell that it is very personal to them. It is about Georgia. And she is starting her first year at university. She's going to university with two of her very close school friends, and she is given a roommate, which is not super common in UK university, but it does happen occasionally, and so she's given a roommate, Rooney. And Georgia is really spending the novel realizing her sexuality, and that is the core of this book as she comes to realize she's asexual and aromantic. That's really great, and that's really important, and I honestly don't think there's any other book out there doing it this way. This is a book about accepting and loving and understanding yourself, and it is for someone who is asexual and aromantic. I mean, it doesn't have to just be for that, but it is like that's the sexuality that Georgia realizes she is, and she goes through the entire process that any queer person is going to go through. But I've never before seen it apply, like this lens applied to an ace person. And it's really lovely, and I think it is very, very important. And I can really, really, really appreciate that. However, I am only gonna put this in. I hope somebody is listening. So this book suffers a lot of things that the other books don't 100% suffer. It is really long, and I understand that Georgia is going through a lot and that it is a long process, but the plot itself, outside of her internal growth, goes on forever, and a lot of it hinges on the miscommunication trope, and it is done fine. Like, I don't think it's destroying the story that it hinges so heavily on the miscommunication trope, especially because it's miscommunication between friends at a very pivotal point in their life. They've all just started university. They're all really discovering new aspects of who they are. But for a bunch of really old friends, I do feel like it was a little bit blown out of proportion. I also feel like, unlike most of the other books I have read here, the side characters just aren't given much, if anything, to do or to grow. They are fleshed out just enough. I think the only exception to this is Rooney, and maybe Sunil, but mostly Rooney. She has her own stuff to unpackage, and it's definitely not the focus, but it's important in its own way, because what she's dealing with is very different from what Georgia has dealt with. Other characters, though, Pip and Jason, I feel like they were really flat. Especially Jason. Felt like they were sort of just props for Georgia and for the plot to move forward. And that is a shame, because I don't feel that way about any other of Alice's books. I really just feel that way about Loveless. And I wonder if it's because it is such a personal story to the author that the focus is on Georgia and Georgia coming to terms with her asexuality. That other things were dropped to make sure that was the thing that's shown. I do think it's a weakness in general for the book, though. So I hope somebody's listening. I think it's a really important book. I think it is a book everyone should read, even if you're not aro ace, because it will put you in the shoes of someone who is, and you should grow your reading that way. But I don't think it's like a must right away necessarily, but I do think if you're looking especially to diversify your reading, great one to go with. All right, then I read Solitaire. Solitaire is about Tori Spring. This is the second novel. No, I'm sorry, this is the debut novel of Alice Oseman. And this is the edited, updated edition that just, it went through, and it you can read the full introduction if you pick up a copy, but I believe she said that she just kind of streamlined some stuff and also clarified some things that could be taken or were written down in a way she didn't like, and so were maybe a little toxic. Solitaire is about Tori Spring, Charlie's older sister, and she is in her second to last year of high school, and she's just going through it. She is basically disassociating the entire time, and a new kid comes to school, Michael Holden. It is not a love story, but they become, it's a little bit of a love story, but it's not really a love story. They become close friends. He's seen as kind of a weirdo by a lot of people for reasons, and he's also got a lot of his own stuff going on, but Tori and Michael really bond. And then Lucas, who is someone Tori used to know, also joins the school, and he seems really interested in Tori. And at the same time, there is this sort of prank social experiment thing happening called Solitaire. There are messages being left around the school. There are messages online. It's a little shady. It seems to be all about disrupting education and not allowing stagnation. It's sort of hard. Solitaire itself is sort of hard to explain, but Tori and Michael start investigating Solitaire. And that's a very basic way to describe it. This really is about Tori and her mental health and just where she is at the time. I thought this book was perfect. This is my Nick and Charlie book. This is my favorite book Alice Oseman has written, and this was her debut, so that's a little wild. I really, really connected with Tori. I saw a lot of myself in her as a character, and I also thought that it being a really short novel, it packed a punch, even with as short as it was. I'm definitely putting it so high because I love Tori, and subsequently anytime she showed up in a book, that made the book so much better. But I do also think that there's something really profound about the fact that it's not a love story, and it's a little bit about getting better, but it's not, like, the message is healing is important, but it's not like getting better is going back to who you were. You know, it's about you get better on your own terms, you heal on your own terms, and if you're surrounded by a community of people who want to help you, you know, your terms are probably better. But I liked that, and I liked that it doesn't wrap up everything at the end. Like, it wraps up, it's satisfying, but it doesn't she's not like fixed. Things aren't just better, but they're on their way to better, and I thought that was a really fantastic message, and it's something that hit me even as an adult, where a lot of these stories are kind of high school centric, and this one is as well, but overall it hit me as an adult as really important message and just fantastic. So Solitaire was my Nick and Charlie book. I loved it so very much, and I could see myself, of all of the things on here, I would reread Heartstopper. It's short, it wouldn't take that long, but I would reread Solitaire in a heartbeat. Yeah, really, really fantastic. And then I read this winter. This is a novella that takes place, I think, between volumes 4 and 5, or maybe in the middle of volume 4 of Heartstopper, and also takes place after Solitaire, I think. I'm not 100% sure how the timeline of these books work, but I like vaguely understand. So it's sometime in there. And it's really just a novella. It's a short snippet of one Christmas And we get a chapter from Tori, or like a little section from Tori, a little section from Charlie, and actually, for the first time ever, a little section from Oliver, which is the youngest Spring sibling. This is going in, you're being gay. Good job. Carry on. Just because I feel like it really doesn't add much besides us getting Oliver's perspective, which was really interesting. And I'm curious to see if moving forward he'll ever have a novel or something where we can return to him when he's a little older, because he is quite young. His perspective of things was the most interesting thing about this book. I love Tori, so anytime Tori's on the page, but honestly, Oliver was the most interesting thing. I love Nick and Charlie, and I liked those scenes as well, but overall, this isn't doing anything new or special. It's just sort of fan servicey. So you're being gay. Good job. Carry on. Then I read Radio Silence. So Radio Silence is Oled's book. Oled was written out of the show because he has a lot going on, and the lot going on is this book. It's Radio Silence. The premise of this one is a little hard to explain as well. I feel like most of these books have surprisingly high concept setups, in that you couldn't just be like, it's this. Like Heartstopper, you can, but Solitaire, you really can't. Loveless, you can. Radio Silence is kind of a hard one to explain. So the protagonist of Radio Silence is Francis, but ultimately the main character is Oled. It is about Oled. And I would even argue that Francis's story doesn't really wrap up, whereas Oled's kind of does. So Francis is obsessed, deep obsessed into the fandom. Probably has acrylic standees. Obsessed deep into the fandom. She doesn't, but she would if they existed. For this podcast called, the podcast is called Universe City, I believe. And the narrator is an anonymous person who goes by the name Radio Silence. And when I say podcast, it's very much in the vein of like Night Vale. So like that kind of storytelling podcast where it's first person dispatches from Universe City. And Frances, who's in her final year of high school, or second to last. A lot of time passes over this one. It's like a long one. She's nearly done with high school. She's looking at universities and applying and interviewing with them. And she finds out that Oled, who she knows vaguely, but gets to know better, is Radio Silence, is the creator of Universe City. He wants to remain anonymous, and their paths become intertwined. And Frances has a sort of secret from her past that has to do with Oled and Oled's family, and Oled has a lot to deal with at home. And that's the setup as best I can give it to you. I liked this one so much more than I thought I would. My big problem was that Frances really didn't seem to wrap up. She had conclusions, and she wasn't like left dangling out there, but there were some plot threads that I do feel like were dropped in regards to her. I do, however, love Oled, and I didn't realize how much I loved Oled until I read this book. So this book is going, and I'm platonically in love with you. This is the darkest of the Osemanverse. So I recommend looking up trigger warnings for any of her books because they deal with heavy topics, but this is the one that I think carries the most trigger warnings and would probably hit people the hardest if they came to them without suspecting they were there. One of the weaknesses, though, is Universe City. I get, like, there's so much work on the page done to make the reader understand this podcast and be invested in it as much as we could be, but I still feel like it almost wasn't enough. I feel like it's really hard to manufacture fandom for a podcast. So I was born for this. It's fairly easy to manufacture fandom around a band because everyone has some sort of preset idea of what that would look like. But for a podcast, it's like a little harder, and I don't know if it worked. I'm still a little hazy on the podcast. I do think that this dealt with the most interesting topics in the most interesting way, though. And I really loved the characters. I think these are some of the strongest characters, and the side characters are all given interesting things to do. I'm platonically in love with you. Also, I obviously liked this book. I gave 2 of the tier rank sections lines from this book. Then I read I Was Born for This. This is the second most recent Alice Oseman novel, and it is the first, I think, that wasn't, yeah, it must be. It was the first not directly related to Heartstopper or the Heartstopper characters in some way. Although, I think it's implied that our protagonist Angel goes possibly to the same schools that either Tori or Charlie would have attended. Like, she's definitely set in that universe, in that world. Although there's no crossover. Same with Loveless. These are the 2 that just like have almost no crossover. Oh my gosh, no, that's not the next one I read. That's okay. We'll do Nick and Charlie last. So I Was Born for I just forgot that one existed. It was on the list. So I Was Born for This is about Angel, who is a mega fan of this band called The Ark, and Jimmy, who is one of the 3 members of the band The Ark. Think very One Direction. And so that's like the fandom we have around this group. Angel goes to London to stay with her internet friend Juliet, who she's like best friends with but had never met in person before this, to stay with Juliet for a week and basically just hang out, celebrate the Ark, and then at the end of the week go to an Ark concert. Jimmy is going through it, and he is, you know, the Ark's about to sign like a new contract that he's not sure he's okay with. He's like been having a lot of anxiety attacks, and especially in regards to like not feeling safe around crowds of fans, which is a legit fear. I 100% understand that. Because there's so many fans. Because when I'm in big crowds, my first thought is always like, oh my god, someone could have a knife. Someone could have a gun. Love anxiety. So this is the first novel besides this winter where we get multiple point of views, which is kind of really cool, and I really, really enjoyed that. We just kind of watch the characters' like stories kind of converge. I don't want to spoil things. I'm going to very easily say I'm platonically in love with you. This was the last one I read, even though I forgot to rank Nick and Charlie. We'll do that in a second. This is the last one I read, and I just finished it really in like the last or second to last week of 2023, so fairly recently. And I wasn't expecting to like it this much because I've never been big into music or music fandom, so I wasn't sure how I would be able to enjoy or understand that aspect of this story. But the characters are probably the best written characters outside of Tori in Solitaire, that it was really easy to just sink into it. I do think objectively this is probably the most well written novel that Alice has done to this point. It was really easy to put this in. I'm platonically in love with you. I definitely didn't think I would love it this much. Okay, Nick and Charlie. This takes place, I think, after all the Heartstopper graphic novels wrap up. Like, I think it'll be even after volume 6. I'm not sure because it's not out yet. But it is the last summer before Nick goes off to school because he's a year above Charlie. And they're both kind of super stressed about it, and they have a big fight. And it's about the fight, but it's also about reconciling from the fight. And it's also about how their relationship is very different from other people their age relationship. And they certainly have a more mature relationship than a lot of high schoolers would have, which I think is one of the appeals of Nick and Charlie as a couple, is they have this deep, important relationship. Anyway, I'm putting this in You're Being Gay. Good job. Carry on. I do think this one had some really important things for Nick and Charlie as a couple and as characters, and I loved the moments with Tori and Alid, but it's a little fan servicey. Like, I just don't think there's not a lot here to enjoy if you weren't already invested. I don't have much to say. So this is my ranking. I think even if I was going to be a little harsher, I would put Heartstopper in. I hope somebody is listening. But I did enjoy them a little bit more than that, so that's why they're in I'm Platonically in Love with You. I definitely, like I said, think Solitaire is the best of the books. That's the ranking there. I did want to talk about a couple things that I noticed as like overarching things in Alice's writing that I thought were really interesting and kind of worth pointing out. I would say I think generally positively about all of these things. So number one is that there is typically a lack of romance or a lack of a very stereotypical romance. Heartstopper being the obvious exception. None of the novels, not kind of novellas, none of the novels focus on a romantic relationship. There can be some, but it's mostly not there. And I like that. It's very refreshing. And it's sort of on the nose with Solitaire and Radio Silence, but and Loveless, which is all about, being asexual and aromantic and relying on platonic relationships as this really vital, important aspect of people's well-being and their networks. But with I Was Born for This, it's like almost unnoticeable. It's done so seamlessly. Like I said, objectively, I think that is the most well-written of their books. But there's this sort of lack of romantic relationships. Side characters have them, but our protagonists typically do not. There's also a focus on social media, mostly in a positive light, or seen as a positive or a tool that can be used in a positive way. Although it also deals with the consequences of fans and fans on social media. We see this a lot in Radio Silence and in I Was Born for This. And it can be kind of scary. It really puts social media and social media usage into perspective, which I really appreciate. It's also typically used as part of the storytelling technique, especially in Loveless. There's a lot of texting, and typically that sort of thing bothers me, but I actually loved it. I thought it came across as really realistic texting. So I was here for it. I totally vibed with it. These are definitely modern books. And I do think that they will probably, even being modern and with this focus on social media, I think they'll actually maintain their relevancy, and I could see them becoming considered classics. I don't say that lightly, but I think they're impactful, and I think that context of the books, everything is understandable. There is, again, because there's not a focus on romantic relationships, there's a focus on platonic relationships and found family to some degree, but just generally friendships. And the last thing that kind of ties all the books together is school as a sort of hindrance. Most of the characters in these books are not necessarily super interested in schooling or are having their problems exacerbated by their high school setting. And it's not a knock against school, higher education, or high school, but it really allows, I think, the readers who themselves may not be super comfortable or keen on education or school environments, it really allows them to be seen. I personally am someone who loves academia, and I did not feel like I was being called out for loving academia. I felt like I was given a window to see into someone who doesn't love academia and to maybe understand why not. And I think that for people who are looking for alternative paths to success, or to success as defined by society, that this is set in, I think these could be really important books to show that you can live a very fulfilling life even without higher education, or even without like a complete high school degree, although I don't think anyone drops out. One character does. There's at least one character who drops out. I could probably talk about Alice Osman's books for a while. I have a lot more I could say, but I can't without spoiling things, so I'm not going to. I might at some point return and do a really in-depth video essay about it, but I don't think that's for a while if I do ever do something like that. Recommend her books. I think they're really solid. Definitely, I say start with either Solitaire or Loveless. Loveless because it is the least of her novels, and Solitaire because it is the best. I personally think that. Or Heartstopper, but everyone says start with Heartstopper. Save it as a treat. How would you rank these books if you have read them? I'm really curious to see, especially what people's favorite book is. I think it's generally agreed on that Loveless is the least likable. Not that it's bad, just it's the least. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. If you're interested in more content like this, please subscribe. I would really, really appreciate it. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.